On November 8, 2023, in the quiet town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky, two young boys were shot multiple times in their own bedroom while their mother stood over them with a gun. By the end of that day, both children would be dead, and their mother would be in custody, claiming she had been manipulated by video games, the internet, and a mysterious man she could barely describe. This is the story of Tiffany Lucas, a 32-year-old single mother who destroyed her family in a moment of what she called manipulation, but what investigators called cold-blooded murder. What really happened inside that house? And how did a loving mother, by all accounts, become a killer? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will shake you to your core. Before we dive deep into this nightmare, if you're passionate about uncovering the truth behind real crimes and supporting victims who can no longer speak for themselves, hit that subscribe button right now. Every subscription helps us bring justice to light and keeps these important stories from being forgotten. Ring that notification bell because you won't want to miss what comes next. Now, let's begin. County 911. Where is your emergency? 219 Bentwood Drive, Shepherdsville, Kentucky 40165. My neighbor just came up to my door and just passed out and I can't get her to wake up. Is she breathing? She is. How old is she? I would say in her early 30s, and now she's screaming that her kids are dying. I don't know, I don't even know her name. This call came in just after 10 o'clock in the morning on what started as an ordinary Wednesday in Shepherdsville, a small town with a population of just over 14,000 people, nestled about 25 miles south of Louisville, Kentucky. It's the kind of place where people still wave to their neighbors, where crime is usually limited to the occasional theft or traffic violation, and where everyone knows everyone else's business, or at least they think they do. Because on this particular morning, the residents of Bentwood Drive were about to discover that they knew nothing at all about what was happening just a few doors down. The dispatcher continued to gather information from the concerned neighbor who had called for help. Is she breathing? She is. The neighbor confirmed that the woman was in her early 30s and appeared to be conscious, but something was terribly wrong. She kept screaming about her children dying, yet the neighbor had no idea who this woman even was. In a small community like Shepherdsville, that detail alone was unusual. Most people at least recognized their neighbors, even if they didn't know them well. But this woman was a stranger to the person whose doorstep she had collapsed on, and the things she was saying were deeply disturbing. Shepherdsville, Kentucky sits in Bullitt County, a region known more for its rural charm and tight-knit communities than for violent crime. The town was established in the late 1700s and has maintained its small-town character even as the Louisville metropolitan area has expanded around it. Residents take pride in their community, their schools, and their sense of safety. Children play outside unsupervised. Doors are often left unlocked. Trust is a given, not a luxury. But every community, no matter how safe it appears on the surface, has its hidden struggles, its secrets, its families falling apart behind closed doors where no one can see. Tiffany Lucas was one of those hidden struggles. At 32 years old, she was raising two young boys on her own, 6-year-old Jayden and 9-year-old Maurice. To those who knew her casually, she might have seemed like just another single mother doing her best to make ends meet and raise her children in a difficult situation. Single parenthood is never easy, and doing it without a strong support system can be overwhelming. But in recent months, people who knew Tiffany had begun to notice changes in her behavior, changes that suggested something far more serious than the normal stress of raising two children alone. She had become increasingly erratic, increasingly paranoid, increasingly disconnected from reality itself. Friends and relatives would later tell investigators that Tiffany had been expressing bizarre beliefs about technology controlling her mind. She talked about video games manipulating her children, about the internet invading her home, about mysterious forces working through her phone and her Wi-Fi to alter her thoughts and behaviors. These weren't casual complaints about screen time or concerns about age-appropriate content. These were full-blown delusions, the kind that suggested a serious mental health crisis was unfolding. But in a small town where mental illness is often stigmatized and misunderstood, where people are more likely to gossip than to intervene, Tiffany's descent into psychosis went largely unaddressed. Child Protective Services had reportedly been called to the Lucas home before. There had been warning signs that something was off, that the children might be in a concerning situation, that their mother's ability to care for them was deteriorating. But whether through lack of resources, lack of follow-through, or simply the difficulty of proving that someone is an immediate danger to themselves or others, no significant intervention had occurred. Jayden and Maurice remained in their mother's care, and whatever was happening inside Tiffany Lucas's mind continued to worsen, unchecked and unmediated, building toward the horrific violence that would erupt on that November morning. This is 911. Yes, next to 219 Drive, my wife's on the phone. The kid, I just went there at our neighbor's house. The kid, he's on the bed, he's all bloody. There's a kid on the bed all bloody. Yeah, he's in my neighbor's house. Okay, buddy, it's okay. You okay? Do we know what happened to him? I have no idea. We just found our neighbor, the woman, their mom, just freaking out in my yard. There's blood all over the bed. There's a gun. There's two of them. They're both here. They're breathing. The second 911 call came minutes after the first, and this time the horror of the situation became instantly clear. The man calling was the husband of the woman who had initially called about their neighbor collapsing on their doorstep. After his wife had discovered Tiffany Lucas passed out and screaming about her children dying, he had done what any concerned neighbor would do. He ran to her house to check on the kids. What he found inside would haunt him for the rest of his life. Okay, there's two children. Yes, ma'am, and you cannot find a gunshot wound on him. I did not see a gunshot wound. There's a casing in here, though. I just got to put them in safe. And their mom is in our driveway laying on the ground. Oh my God, oh my God. The panic in the caller's voice is palpable, raw, unfiltered. This is not the controlled concern of someone who has found a minor injury or a child who has fallen and scraped a knee. This is the voice of someone who has walked into a scene of absolute carnage, who has seen things that no person should ever have to see, especially not in the bedroom of two young children in a quiet suburban neighborhood on a Wednesday morning. The caller is trying to stay calm, trying to give the dispatcher the information she needs, trying to help these two little boys who are lying in pools of their own blood. But the reality of what he's witnessing keeps breaking through in gasps and exclamations of disbelief. How far away is the ambulance? You have police, fire, and EMS heading your way. Police will probably get there first because they're closest. Okay. Are you okay? Is he awake or is he still? They're breathing. They're just not like responding to me at all. Okay. There's a lot of blood on his back, a lot of blood. The dispatcher is doing her job, keeping the caller on the line, keeping him focused, making sure help is on the way. But even through the professional training and the practiced calm, there's an urgency in her voice. She knows that time is critical. She knows that gunshot wounds, especially to children, can be fatal within minutes if not treated. She knows that every second this man spends on the phone with her is a second those boys are bleeding out in their bedroom. The older of the two kids has one going through his right shoulder and exiting. I just saw that. Okay, come on. But hey, stay with me. Come on, you're almost here. Oh God, what the hell? By this point, the caller has found the gunshot wounds. What initially looked like blood with no obvious source now reveals itself to be exactly what his worst fears had suggested. These children have been shot. One of them, the older boy, 9-year-old Maurice, has a bullet wound that entered through his right shoulder and exited somewhere else on his body. The trajectory suggests he may have been lying down when he was shot, possibly in bed, possibly already asleep or just waking up. The younger boy, 6-year-old Jayden, has his own injuries, though in the chaos of the moment and the caller's desperate attempts to help, the exact nature of those wounds isn't immediately clear. Inside the house, detectives would later find evidence that told the story of those final moments with brutal clarity. There were 4 shell casings on the bed where the boys had been found. 2 more casings were on the floor nearby. The gun, a handgun that would later be traced and examined, was lying on the bed next to the children. The blood patterns on the sheets, on the walls, on the floor, suggested that both boys had been shot multiple times at close range while they were in or near their beds. This wasn't a case of an accidental discharge. This wasn't a case of a gun being found and played with by curious children. This was deliberate. This was intentional. This was execution-style violence inflicted on 2 defenseless children by someone who had to have been standing right over them. Surveillance audio from a doorbell camera on a nearby house had captured the sound of 4 distinct gunshots. Neighbors who were interviewed later would say they heard the shots but didn't immediately recognize them as gunfire. In a neighborhood like this, loud noises might be construction, might be a car backfiring, might be fireworks left over from a recent holiday. No one thinks gunshots. No one thinks murder. Not here. Not in Shepherdsville. Not on Bentwood Drive. But the doorbell camera doesn't lie, and the timestamp on that audio would match perfectly with the timeline investigators were building of when Tiffany Lucas shot her sons. The scene inside that bedroom was, by all accounts, one of the most disturbing crime scenes the Shepherdsville Police Department had ever processed. Blood soaked through the bedding and pooled on the floor. The walls had spatter patterns consistent with close-range gunfire. The children's bodies bore wounds that no parent should ever inflict, wounds that suggested rage or desperation or complete detachment from reality. And through it all, the mother who had done this was lying in a neighbor's driveway, barely conscious, barely coherent, mumbling about manipulation and video games and forces beyond her control. How many's in here? Just one kid here and one's going to go in here. Are they both breathing still? One, he's pumping on him. The other one was still breathing. They're both shot in the head. Oh, I think he's shot in the head. Shoulder, like 6 and 3, 6 and 4. Oh, they're that small, 6 and 9. Yeah, they're Bobbies, oh my God. When the paramedics arrived and entered the house, the full scope of the tragedy became clear. Both boys had been shot in the head. The initial assessment that one had been shot in the shoulder was partially correct. The bullet had indeed entered through the shoulder area, but the trajectory and the damage suggested head wounds as well. These were not superficial injuries. These were not wounds that could be bandaged and treated at the scene. These were life-threatening, catastrophic injuries that required immediate transport to a trauma center, and even then, the chances of survival were slim. The paramedics worked with the kind of controlled urgency that comes from years of training and experience. They assessed the boys, established airways, started IVs, prepared them for transport. Every movement was efficient, practiced, but underneath that professional exterior was the heartbreaking knowledge that these were children, Bobbies, as one of the first responders had said, and that their injuries were severe enough that survival was far from guaranteed. 6 years old and 9 years old. Still young enough to believe in superheroes and magic. Still young enough to need their mother to tuck them in at night and check for monsters under the bed. And their own mother had done this to them. 207, this is Bullitt County Squad 7, inbound to your facility with a juvenile approximately 7 to 8 years old, GSW to the head. We have regained a pulse at this time. We do have a police escort. We are approximately 10 minutes out from your facility. The radio transmission from the ambulance to the hospital is clinical, factual, designed to give the emergency room staff the information they need to prepare for the incoming patient. GSW means gunshot wound. The pulse has been regained, which means at some point during the initial treatment, the child's heart had stopped beating. They had brought him back. But regaining a pulse doesn't mean regaining consciousness, doesn't mean the brain is intact, doesn't mean survival. It just means the heart is beating for now. The second ambulance followed shortly after with Maurice, the 9-year-old, whose condition was equally critical. Both boys were rushed to the University of Louisville Hospital, the region's premier trauma center, where teams of doctors and nurses were standing by to receive them. But even with the best medical care available, Even with every possible intervention, the damage that had been done was simply too severe. The bullets had torn through young, developing brains. The blood loss had been significant. The trauma, both physical and the psychological trauma that would never be addressed because these children would never wake up, was irreversible. As the ambulances raced toward Louisville with lights flashing and sirens wailing, back at the house on Bentwood Drive, police officers were securing the scene, interviewing the neighbors who had made the 911 calls, and dealing with the woman who had caused all of this devastation. Tiffany Lucas was barely able to stand, barely able to speak coherently, and when she did speak, the things she said made almost no sense at all. "Is she conscious? Ma'am, what's your name?" "Tiffany." "Tiffany. All right, Tiffany, I'm going to change these handcuffs out, okay? And then I'm going to roll you over, I'm going to sit you up. All right. Now I'm going to pick your hands up so you can take these off. Do not struggle. Do you understand me? Okay. Now I want you to listen to me. I'm going to take this arm, you're going to roll this direction, okay? You're going to sit up at the same time. You understand? 1, 2, 3. The officers who first encountered Tiffany Lucas found her lying face down in the neighbor's driveway, handcuffed and barely responsive. The handcuffs had been applied as a safety precaution by the first officer on scene, who had been told by the neighbors that this woman had admitted to shooting her children. Even in her semi-conscious state, even as she mumbled and struggled to keep her eyes open, she was considered a potential threat. She had to be secured. She had to be controlled. Because if she had shot her own children, there was no telling what else she might do. The officer's instructions to Tiffany are careful, methodical. He explains exactly what he's going to do before he does it. He tells her not to struggle. He counts to 3 before rolling her over. This is standard procedure for dealing with a detained individual, but it's also a strange moment of gentleness in the midst of such horror. This woman has just killed her children, or at least shot them with intent to kill, yet the officer still treats her with a certain baseline of human dignity. He doesn't throw her around. He doesn't yell at her or berate her. He simply does his job, which is to get her upright, get her into a patrol car, and get her to the station where detectives can figure out what the hell happened here. "Take this leg folded in, make that foot touch your knee. No, to the side on the ground. Now we're going to roll again this way and I'm going to assist you up on your feet, okay? You ready? 1, 2, 3, have you taken anything? Have you been drinking? Then why can't you stand up? You just don't feel like it. I said I don't feel right. Don't feel right." Tiffany's inability to stand, her slurred speech, her general lack of responsiveness, all suggested that she might be under the influence of drugs or alcohol. This would become an important question as the investigation progressed. Had she taken something before shooting her children? Was this a case of drug-induced psychosis? Or was this simply the manifestation of an untreated mental illness that had spiraled completely out of control? The officer asked her directly if she had taken anything or been drinking, and her response was vague, non-committal. She just didn't feel right. What does that mean? Is it physical? Is it psychological? Is it the weight of what she's just done finally settling onto her shoulders as the adrenaline wears off and reality begins to intrude? "Okay, I guess we'll put her in my car, and when EMS gets down here, they can come and check her out." They get her upright, swap restraints, and try to move her toward a patrol car. She can barely stand. Her speech is faint. As the officers work to get Tiffany Lucas into the back of a patrol car, another officer arrived and began asking questions about why this woman was in handcuffs, what had happened, what they knew so far. The answers he received were chilling. Why was she cuffed? Because she apparently admitted to someone that she shot her kids. We don't know. Was it her dad or was it this guy here? She came over here, fell out in the driveway. His wife seen it, which Christina got a statement from him. She got him, and apparently she told him that she shot her kids. He went over and looked and seen them and then came over here and called. And this is this guy right here. Yeah. The gentleman in the green shirt and the female in the black pants and green shirt. Christina got a statement from them. So this is how it happened. Tiffany Lucas shot her 2 sons multiple times in their bedroom. Then instead of calling for help, instead of trying to save them, instead of doing any of the things a mother should do when her children are hurt, she walked out of her house, crossed the street or walked down the block and collapsed on a neighbor's doorstep. When that neighbor came to her aid, Tiffany told them she had shot her kids. Just said it. Confessed it. The neighbor, understandably horrified, had her husband run to the house to check on the children while she called 911. That's when the second call came in, the one where the neighbor described finding two little boys covered in blood with a gun lying nearby. The only thing she has said to me since that is, are they still alive? Even in her barely conscious state, even as she struggled to stand or speak coherently, Tiffany Lucas asked about her sons. Are they still alive? It's a question that suggests some level of awareness of what she's done, some level of understanding that she has harmed them, possibly killed them. But it's also a question that seems almost detached, clinical, as if she's asking about two strangers rather than her own children. There's no panic in her voice according to the officer's description. There's no desperation, just a simple question, are they still alive? Inside the house, paramedics continue to fight to save Jayden and Maurice. The scene was chaotic, urgent, focused entirely on getting those two boys stabilized and into ambulances as quickly as possible. But even as they worked, even as they administered chest compressions and medications and prepared for transport, there was an unspoken understanding among the first responders that these children might not make it. The wounds were too severe. The blood loss was too significant. And even if they did survive the ambulance ride to the hospital, even if the trauma surgeons could somehow save their lives, what kind of life would they have? What kind of brain damage would they suffer from bullets that had torn through their skulls? What kind of psychological damage would come from knowing that their own mother had tried to kill them? I haven't moved anything. There's 4 shell casings on the bed, 2 on the bed, 2 on the floor. So she shot at least 4 times. As the children were rushed to the hospital and Tiffany Lucas was loaded into a police cruiser, detectives began processing the crime scene inside the house. What they found painted a clear and devastating picture. 4 shell casings on and around the bed where the boys had been shot. A handgun lying on the bedding, within arm's reach of where the children had been found. Blood everywhere. Spatter on the walls consistent with close-range gunfire. The trajectory of the bullets suggested that Tiffany had been standing over her sons when she pulled the trigger, that they had likely been in bed, possibly still asleep, when the shooting started. The number of shots fired, at least 4 based on the casings found at the scene and confirmed by the doorbell camera audio, suggested this was not a single impulsive act. Pulling a trigger once might be explained as a moment of insanity, a split-second decision that can never be taken back. But pulling it 4 times, or possibly more if some of the bullets went through both children, requires sustained intent. It requires making the decision to kill, and then making it again, and again, and again. Each trigger pull is a choice. Each shot is a deliberate act of violence. And Tiffany Lucas had made those choices multiple times while standing over her sleeping or defenseless children. By midday, Tiffany Lucas was transported from the scene to the Bullitt County Sheriff's Office for questioning. The case against her was already overwhelming. She had confessed to the neighbor. The gun was in the house. The shell casings matched the number of shots heard on the surveillance audio. Her children were fighting for their lives with gunshot wounds that could only have come from someone standing right next to them. Every piece of evidence pointed directly at her. But investigators still needed to hear her side of the story, needed to understand what could possibly drive a mother to do something like this, needed to document her state of mind for the eventual court proceedings that would determine her fate. The interview that followed would be one of the strangest, most disturbing interrogations in Bullitt County's history. Because what Tiffany Lucas told detectives wasn't a confession in any traditional sense. It wasn't a story of anger or revenge or desperation. It was a rambling, incoherent narrative about manipulation and mind control, about video games and the internet, about mysterious forces, and a man named Parker Borders who she claimed had invaded her thoughts and made her do things she would never do on her own. Whether this was genuine delusion, a calculated attempt to build an insanity defense, or some combination of both, would become a central question as the case moved forward. Shot myself in my ear. You shot yourself in the ear. Where? I don't see anything. There's nothing there. Even before the formal interrogation began, Tiffany was saying things that made no sense. She claimed she had shot herself in the ear, but when the officers examined her, there was no wound, no blood, no evidence of any injury at all. Was this a delusion? Was she confusing what happened to her children with what happened to herself? Or was this an early attempt to claim that she too was a victim, that she had been harmed in some way that justified or explained her actions? The officers documented the statement, but found no physical evidence to support it. Okay, we're going to take her back to the interview room. I got to go in and turn it on, so we want to wait until I get there. That way we can view her and just keep an eye on her. The decision was made to formally interview Tiffany Lucas in a recorded interrogation room. This is standard procedure in any serious criminal case, but especially in a case involving the death or serious injury of children. Every word she said, every gesture, every expression, would be captured on video and audio for later analysis by investigators, prosecutors, defense attorneys, mental health experts, and eventually a judge and possibly a jury. These recordings would become crucial evidence in understanding not just what happened, but why it happened, and whether Tiffany Lucas was legally responsible for her actions or was so detached from reality that she couldn't be held fully accountable. People aren't right. Who ain't right? People are not right. They're preying on children. It's just not right. As she waited in the interview room, Tiffany continued to mumble statements that seemed disconnected from any coherent narrative. People aren't right. They're preying on children. It's just not right. On the surface, this sounds like she's expressing concern about child predators or child abuse, which would be deeply ironic given that she herself had just shot her own children multiple times. But in the context of her later statements about manipulation and mind control, it's possible she was talking about the forces she believed were controlling her. The video games and internet entities she claimed were preying on children by manipulating their minds and turning parents against them. He said you got earrings in, didn't you? It's okay. It means everything. You're up. You're sick. Yeah, no, I'm not saying anything. Her comments continued to veer further from reality, becoming increasingly fragmented and difficult to follow. The reference to earrings, the statement that something means everything, the acknowledgement that she's sick, all of these suggest a mind that is either genuinely disordered or working very hard to appear that way. Mental health experts who would later review these recordings would have to determine whether Tiffany Lucas was experiencing a legitimate psychotic break, or whether she understood exactly what she had done and was trying to lay the groundwork for an insanity defense from the very first moments of her interaction with law enforcement. Can you tell us what your name is? Tiffany Lucas, Tiffany Lucas, Tiffany Lucas. The formal interrogation began with basic identifying questions. What is your name? Tiffany Lucas. Simple, clear, coherent. She knows who she is. She can answer direct questions when she chooses to. This would become important later because one of the key tests for criminal insanity is whether the defendant understands the nature of their actions and can distinguish right from wrong. If Tiffany Lucas could tell the detectives her name, could follow simple instructions, could respond appropriately to basic questions, then she had at least some connection to reality, some ability to understand what was happening around her. Within hours, she would sit down in an interrogation room with detectives who would press for answers, and what she told them would be even harder to comprehend than the crime itself. I feel like I've been manipulated by the game systems and everything. They manipulate my children, manipulate my mind. Who? All these game systems and just everything. The games you said. Yeah, like PlayStations, all the games the kids play. Yeah, it manipulates their minds and then they get into mine. This was the core of Tiffany Lucas's explanation for what happened. She believed that video game systems, specifically mentioning PlayStation, had the ability to manipulate minds. Not in the metaphorical sense that parents often complain about, where children become addicted to screen time or desensitized to violence through repeated exposure to violent games. Tiffany believed in literal mind control. She believed that these game systems could get into children's minds, alter their thoughts and behaviors, and then somehow transfer that control to the parents, to her, manipulating her into doing things she would never normally do. This kind of delusional thinking is actually consistent with certain types of severe mental illness, particularly schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders. People experiencing psychosis often fixate on technology as a source of persecution or control. They might believe their phones are spying on them, that the television is sending them messages, that the government or aliens or demons are communicating through electronic devices. In Tiffany's case, the fixation was on video games and the internet, which she saw as invasive forces that had infiltrated her home and her family, and ultimately her own mind. Investigators would later testify that these statements were consistent from the very beginning. From the moment Tiffany Lucas began talking to police, even in her semi-conscious state at the scene, she talked about being manipulated. She talked about forces beyond her control. She talked about the internet, Facebook, Wi-Fi, technology in general as the source of her problems, and ultimately the source of the violence that destroyed her family. Whether this belief system developed suddenly or had been building over months or years, whether it was the result of a mental illness or drug use or some combination of factors, would become a central question in understanding this case. Detectives tried to steer her back to the crime at the center of it all, what she had done to her children. "How old are your boys?" "Jayden's 6, Maurice is 9. I'm going to talk to you today about what happened earlier, okay? But can you tell me a little bit about yourself? I mean, where are you from or where you grew up or anything like that? I know I look crazy, but I'm not. If I know I look crazy, but I'm not crazy." There's a moment of self-awareness here that's striking. Tiffany Lucas knows how she appears to others. She knows that sitting in an interrogation room, having just shot her 2 children, talking about video games controlling her mind, she looks crazy. But she insists that she's not. This distinction is important to her. Looking crazy is not the same as being crazy. Looking crazy might be the result of stress or fear or being manipulated by outside forces. But being crazy, actually being mentally ill, would mean that the problem is inside her, that she is fundamentally broken or damaged, and that's not an identity she's willing to accept. "I don't think you look crazy. I'm just trying to, if I'm going to talk to someone, I'd rather know who they are. I can tell you a little bit about me. I love my children. You tell me a little bit about you. Okay. I love my children. I love my boys so much. I know I wouldn't hurt them." The detective's approach is calm, non-confrontational. He tells her she doesn't look crazy. He says he just wants to know who she is. This is a classic interrogation technique, building rapport, making the subject feel comfortable, encouraging them to talk. And Tiffany responds by immediately declaring her love for her children. "I love my children. I love my boys so much. I wouldn't hurt them." This statement, coming from a woman whose children are at that very moment fighting for their lives from gunshot wounds she inflicted, is jarring in its complete disconnect from reality. But it's also revealing, because it shows that on some level, Tiffany Lucas still sees herself as a good mother, still identifies with the role of protector and caregiver, even as the evidence of her violence is literally lying in a hospital bed just miles away. "I didn't. I was letting them play video games and I wasn't focusing on how I was supposed to, And they get that video game and YouTube and the kids, it just messes their minds up. Haven't you ever heard anything like that before? I mean, yeah. Like I really feel like it is manipulating the children and they get into the children's minds and break the families up. That's what I feel. I mean, you could be right. I am right. Yeah. And I know I'm right and you do too. Yeah, you do." She pivots quickly from declaring her love for her children to blaming herself for letting them play video games, and then to blaming the video games themselves for manipulating everyone involved. The detective plays along, agreeing that yes, he's heard concerns about screen time and child development, trying to keep her talking. And Tiffany seizes on this validation, insisting that she is right, that she knows she's right, and that the detective knows it too. There's an almost desperate quality to this insistence, as if getting someone to agree with her about the dangers of technology will somehow make everything else make sense, will somehow justify or explain why two little boys are dying. I mean, you just know the stuff that's on the internet that you have access to now is terrible. It's terrible for the kids and they need to stop. Like my kids are beautiful angels, you know. Were they misbehaving earlier? No, no, do they? They're perfect. They are. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Your engagement means everything and shows that these victims are not forgotten. Now let's continue with what happened next. Tiffany describes her children as beautiful angels, as perfect, as not misbehaving. This is significant because it removes one possible motive for the violence. She's not claiming they made her angry, that they were out of control, that she snapped under the pressure of dealing with difficult children. She's saying they were perfect, which makes what she did to them even more inexplicable from a rational standpoint, but perfectly consistent with her narrative about external manipulation. If the children were perfect, then there's no reason a loving mother would hurt them, unless something outside of her control forced her to do it. Do you know what happened to them today? Can you talk to me about that? I just did. When asked directly about what happened to her children, Tiffany claims she's already explained it. In her mind, talking about video game manipulation and outside forces is the same as explaining the shooting. She doesn't see these as separate issues. The manipulation is the shooting. The shooting is the result of the manipulation. They're one and the same event in her fractured understanding of what happened. Her contradictions are stark. She claims deep devotion to her sons while blaming YouTube and video games for corrupting them. Relatives would later say Child Protective Services had been called to the house before, warning signs that something was off. This detail about prior CPS involvement is crucial. It means that before the shooting, before this terrible morning in November, someone had been concerned enough about the children's welfare to make an official report. Whether that report was about Tiffany's mental health, about the conditions in the home, about her parenting abilities, or about something else entirely, we don't know from the public record. But we know that the system that's supposed to protect children had been alerted to potential problems in the Lucas household, and yet Jayden and Maurice had remained in their mother's care. This isn't to assign blame to CPS workers, who are chronically overworked and under-resourced, and have to make impossible decisions about which children are in immediate danger versus which families just need support and monitoring. But it is a sobering reminder that the warning signs were there, that people saw something was wrong, and that the intervention, whatever it was, wasn't enough to prevent this tragedy. When pressed, Lucas introduces a name. I feel like someone tried to manipulate me through my phone, manipulate me through my house, doing stuff to me. What are they doing to you? Manipulating my mind. Parker Borders. His name is Parker Borders. And here we have the introduction of the mysterious Parker Borders, a name that will come up repeatedly throughout Tiffany's interrogation, and that investigators will spend considerable time trying to track down and verify. Who is Parker Borders? Is he a real person? Is he someone Tiffany knows? Or is he a figment of her deteriorating mental state, a convenient scapegoat to blame for the unforgivable violence she's committed? The detective asks her to explain. What about him? He lives in Bardstown, and I'm pretty sure he's been manipulating my mind for like 3 years, really, through my phone, putting up things in my house like real evil, dark, weird stuff. Like trying to get you to do things. Yeah, like alter my mind completely, like flip me. Like I'm a woman of God. I don't hurt children, you protect them. And I feel like I have to protect my children. I know you do. I love my kids. I know you do. I would never do anything like this unless someone manipulated me. According to Tiffany, Parker Borders lives in Bardstown, a town about 25 miles southeast of Shepherdsville, and he has been manipulating her mind for approximately 3 years through her phone and by putting things in her house. The nature of these things, these evil, dark, weird things, is never clearly explained. Are they physical objects? Are they messages or images on her devices? Are they completely imaginary? Tiffany describes the manipulation as an attempt to flip her, to fundamentally alter who she is as a person, to take a woman of God who would never hurt children and turn her into someone capable of violence. And she insists that she had to protect her children from this manipulation, even though the end result of that protection was shooting them multiple times in their bedroom. The logic here is completely inverted. Protection means violence. Love means harm. Being a good mother means killing your children to save them from something worse. This kind of twisted reasoning is characteristic of certain severe mental illnesses, particularly those involving paranoid delusions and command hallucinations, where a person genuinely believes that harming someone is the only way to protect them from a greater threat. We see this sometimes in cases involving postpartum psychosis, where mothers kill their children believing they're saving them from the devil or from a fate worse than death. We see it in cases of severe schizophrenia, where voices command someone to hurt others to prevent some imagined catastrophe. Whether Tiffany Lucas was experiencing this kind of genuine delusional state, or whether she's constructing an insanity defense after the fact is a question that would require extensive psychiatric evaluation to answer. To Lucas, Parker Borders is the person who invaded her thoughts, flipped her mind, and left her unable to protect her children in any way except by ending their lives. So do you think Parker actually manipulated you into hurting your kids? Yes. Did he actually tell you in person or, well, he controls my phone. All my bills are in his name. Like he has too much access to me, so I feel like he manipulated my mind, I would never hurt my children. Now we're getting into more specific allegations about Parker Borders. He controls her phone. All her bills are in his name. He has too much access to her. These are claims that can be verified or disproven. If her phone bills, her utility bills, her rent or mortgage, if any of these are actually in the name of someone called Parker Borders, that would establish at minimum that this person exists and has some kind of relationship with Tiffany. But if investigators check and find that all her accounts are in her own name, or in the name of a family member, or an ex-partner with a completely different name, then it suggests Parker Borders is either someone she's deliberately lying about or someone who exists only in her delusional system. Who is this Parker guy to you? Just a friend or like a sugar daddy type thing? Before I had a friend who was with him and she mysteriously passed away in a car wreck. So I just feel uncomfortable. I don't know. I feel like him. I feel like it's him. It's not me. It's not me. I'm right with God, so I know it's not me. I know it's not in my mind. Yeah, it's not me. It just isn't. Tiffany describes Parker Borders as a friend or a sugar daddy type, suggesting some kind of relationship that may have involved financial support or control. She also mentions that a friend of hers who was previously with Parker mysteriously died in a car wreck, which adds another layer to her paranoia and her belief that Parker is a dangerous person capable of harming others. Whether any of this is true, whether there was a friend who died, whether Parker Borders had any connection to that death, whether Parker Borders exists at all, these are all open questions at this point in the investigation. But what's clear is that Tiffany has constructed an elaborate narrative in which she is not the villain of this story. She is the victim. Parker Borders is the villain. He's the one who manipulated her, controlled her, flipped her mind, made her do things she would never normally do. And because she's right with God, because she knows in her heart that she's a good person, she knows that the violence came from outside, from him, not from her. It's not me. It just isn't. This absolute refusal to accept responsibility, this complete denial of agency, will be a consistent theme throughout the interrogation. Did he provide you with a firearm, with a gun? Yes, it was his. And here's another verifiable claim. The gun used in the shooting belongs to Parker Borders. If this is true, if the gun is registered to someone by that name or can be traced back to him through purchase records or serial numbers, that would be significant evidence that at least parts of Tiffany's story have some basis in reality. But if the gun is registered to Tiffany herself, or was purchased by her, or has no connection to anyone named Parker Borders, then it's another piece of evidence that her story is fabricated or delusional. Investigators listening noted everything. A handgun was found on the bed next to her son's, and 6 shell casings scattered across the room. Surveillance audio from a doorbell camera had captured the sound of 4 gunshots. Neighbors had heard her screams immediately after. Every piece of evidence in that house pointed back to her. But in the interview room, she insists the gun belongs to someone else. So that gun that was, I guess, in the house, in the bedroom or whatever, that's his gun. Yes. Why'd he give it to you? I don't know. How long ago did he give it to you? You remember? Like years, months, days. When? I don't know, don't remember. Been a while. Been a while. Tiffany can't or won't provide specific details about when she received the gun from Parker Borders or why he gave it to her. This vagueness is typical of her responses throughout the interrogation. When asked for concrete information that could be verified or that would commit her to a specific timeline or set of facts, she becomes evasive. I don't know, don't remember, been a while. These non-answers allow her to maintain her narrative without providing any evidence that could disprove it. What do you remember him telling you in your mind to do or persuading you to do? I just don't know. He just, it's happened once before. Like I got a weird feeling, like it just felt weird, and then here recently I just felt weird. I'm not like I'm a good mom, like I'm a really good woman. I'm a good mother, I have veneers and everything, I'm sorry. I said I have veneers and everything. I don't look like this, okay? This is one of the strangest exchanges in the entire interrogation. When asked what Parker Borders told her to do or persuaded her to do, Tiffany says it's happened once before. She got a weird feeling, and then recently she felt weird again. But she provides no specifics about what the feeling was or what she did as a result. And then, almost randomly, she interjects that she has veneers and that she doesn't normally look like this. It's as if she's trying to establish her identity as a put-together, respectable person, someone who invests in her appearance and who wouldn't normally be in this situation. The veneers, which are cosmetic dental work that can cost thousands of dollars, are offered as proof of her status, her self-care, her normalcy. But of course, having veneers has nothing to do with whether someone is capable of violence, and the non-sequitur nature of the comment only reinforces the impression that Tiffany's thinking is severely disorganized. Do you remember hurting your sons today? I mean, you remember, but I'm not saying it's you. It's not me. It's not you. I know it's not me. I would never hurt my children, right? The detective tries to get her to acknowledge that she remembers the shooting, even if she's claiming it wasn't really her doing it. But Tiffany won't even go that far. She insists she would never hurt her children, phrasing it almost as a question, seeking validation from the detective. Right. You agree with me, don't you? I would never hurt my children. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain this position, to simultaneously know that your children have been shot and that you were the only other person in the house, yet insist that you would never hurt them and it wasn't you, suggests either profound mental illness or a level of denial so deep that it amounts to the same thing. Her responses make little sense. Detectives try again, but she insists on her innocence. They document every contradiction. For them, the facts are already clear. But for Lucas, reality is a moving target, always someone else's fault, always a manipulation. Manipulating is the best word. Through the phones, Wi-Fi, all of that. And once he manipulated you and pushed you into doing this, what do you remember? firing a weapon at them today. I mean, you remember that, right? No. She doesn't remember firing the weapon. Despite the fact that she was found at the scene, that she confessed to the neighbors, that the gun was in the bedroom with her children, that she is now sitting in an interrogation room specifically because of this shooting. She claims she doesn't remember actually pulling the trigger. This could be genuine dissociation, a psychological defense mechanism where the mind protects itself from traumatic memories by blocking them out. It could be a lie, a calculated refusal to provide evidence against herself. Or it could be something in between, a state where she knows what happened but has convinced herself that it wasn't really her, that some version of herself under Parker Boarder's control did this while her true self was locked away somewhere, powerless to intervene. Do you know how many times you pulled the trigger today? No, let me ask you this. After you hurt your sons with a gun, did you think they had passed away, or do you think they were just wounded and would be okay? Because they're both okay. Neither one of them passed away. But what did you think? Did you think you had killed them? I just don't know. I have no words. The detective is trying multiple approaches here. First, how many times did you pull the trigger? She doesn't know. Then, after you hurt your sons, what did you think? Did you think they were dead or just wounded? And here the detective tells her that both boys are okay, that neither one passed away. This is actually not true, at least not in the long term. Both boys would die later that day from their injuries. But at the moment of this interrogation, they are technically still alive, still in surgery, still fighting. So the detective's statement is accurate in the immediate sense. But it's also a tactic, a way to see how Tiffany reacts to the news that her children survived her attack. Does she seem relieved, surprised, disappointed? Her response is, I just don't know. I have no words, which tells us very little about her emotional state or her intentions. Now you went next door to knock on the neighbor's door to get help, right? Okay. What were you when you went over there? What were you going over there for? Just to ask for help? Yes. Okay. So I'm guessing since you were going over there to ask for help, you had seen that your sons had been injured, right? Were bleeding. You saw that, right? The detective is walking her through the timeline, getting her to admit that she knew her sons were injured, that she saw them bleeding, and that she went to the neighbor's house specifically to get help. This is important because it establishes that she had some awareness of what had happened, some understanding that her children needed medical attention. If she was completely detached from reality, if she genuinely believed that nothing bad had happened or that the shooting was someone else's doing and not connected to her in any way, she wouldn't have gone to get help. The fact that she did suggests at least a partial grasp of the situation. I mean, it's a hard thing to think about, and I know it wasn't you. I know that's not you. You're being manipulated, as you said. I understand that. But physically, you're the one who pulled the trigger. Even though it's not you and somebody else is pushing you to do that or manipulating you to do that, you pulled the trigger on the weapon. Is that correct? It's not correct. The detective tries a different tactic here, essentially accepting Tiffany's narrative of manipulation, but asking her to acknowledge the physical reality that she was the one who pulled the trigger. I understand someone manipulated you, but physically, you're the one who did it, right? But even this concession isn't enough for Tiffany. She still won't admit to the physical act. It's not correct. She can't or won't separate the question of who physically pulled the trigger from the question of who bears moral or mental responsibility for the decision to pull it. In her mind, if she's not responsible for the decision, then she's not the one who pulled the trigger, even if her finger was literally on the gun. How did your sons get shot then? I just don't know. You don't know. I have no words. How long after your boys got hurt? How long did it? Did you immediately go next door to ask for help, or did you wait for a while, or what? But do you think it was an accident today, or did you mean to shoot? I just can't talk. The questions keep coming, and Tiffany keeps deflecting. How did your sons get shot? I don't know. Do you think it was an accident? I can't talk. The detective is trying to get any kind of coherent explanation, any acknowledgement of reality, but Tiffany has retreated into a position where she simply won't engage with the fundamental facts of what happened. Hey, look at me for a second, please. How many times did you shoot each one of them? Multiple times. One time. Two times. What? I have no words. I have no words. You don't know how many times you shot them. So I guess you just kept pulling the trigger until it was empty or what? No, I just don't have anything to say right now. This is a crucial question. How many times did you shoot each child? The number of times matters, both for understanding the level of intent and for reconstructing exactly what happened in that bedroom. Did she shoot each child once and then leave? Did she stand there and empty the gun into them? Did one child get shot more times than the other? The forensic evidence would eventually answer these questions, but getting Tiffany's version would help investigators understand her mental state during the shooting. But she won't answer. I have no words. I don't have anything to say. Whether this is because she genuinely doesn't remember or because she knows the answer would be too damning, we can't know. Did anybody spend the night with you and your kids last night? Yes or no? Hey, I know you can hear me. Yes or no, I'm not sure, I don't know, I feel like he's been living in the house with me. I don't know, it's been so weird. Yeah, I've been trying to get him out of there. I don't know what is going on. The detective asks if anyone else was in the house, if Parker Borders or anyone else spent the night or was present during the shooting. Tiffany's answer is typically vague. She feels like he's been living in the house with her. She's been trying to get him out, but she doesn't know what's going on. This could be a description of a real domestic situation where an unwanted person has been staying in her home. Or it could be the description of a delusional belief that someone is in her house even when they're not, a belief that could be associated with paranoid schizophrenia or other psychotic disorders. People experiencing this kind of delusion sometimes feel presences in their homes, hear footsteps or voices, see shadows or figures that aren't there. It's terrifying for the person experiencing it and completely real to them, even though there's no external evidence to support it. Detectives push harder trying to get a straight answer, but her responses stay slippery. Half admissions, half paranoia. She keeps circling back to Parker Borders. Parker was in the house today. Hey, answer, I don't entirely know, you don't know, I don't entirely know, you don't know if he was in the house today, no. I feel like he's been playing with my mind, like coming and going, like, well, that's fine. But did you actually see him? Did he show up today at your house? Yes or no? No. Yes or no? No, no, okay. Is there anybody else in your house today other than you or your kids? No. So ultimately, after all the hedging and the maybes and the feelings, Tiffany admits that Parker Borders was not physically in her house on the day of the shooting. She didn't see him. It was just her and her children. Which means that whatever role Parker Borders played in this tragedy, whatever manipulation or control he may have exerted, it was not by being physically present. It was through the phones, the Wi-Fi, the technology that Tiffany believed could be used to control minds from a distance. For investigators, the name Parker Borders is as much a mystery as her story. They don't know if he's a real person or just another figment of her unraveling mind. Interestingly, there is a person by that name in nearby Bardstown, documented in a 2020 obituary as a son named Parker Borders that confirms the name is local. But nothing in court records, police reports, or media coverage links him to this case. If Parker played a role here, public records offer no proof. So investigators do find that Parker Borders is a real name associated with a real person in the area that Tiffany mentioned. This is significant because it means she didn't just make up a random name. She identified someone who actually exists. But there's no evidence linking that person to her phone, to her bills, to the gun, or to anything else in her story. The obituary confirms his existence but offers no proof of the relationship or the manipulation Tiffany describes. Which leaves several possibilities. Parker Borders is a real person who Tiffany knows and who she's now blaming for her crime, even though he had nothing to do with it. Parker Borders is a real person Tiffany heard about somehow but doesn't actually know, and she's incorporated his name into her delusional system. Parker Borders is a real person who did have some kind of relationship with Tiffany. Maybe he was a friend or a sugar daddy as she claimed. But the mind control and manipulation are delusions she's added to a real relationship. Without more evidence, without interviewing Parker Borders himself if he's still alive and can be located, investigators can't determine which of these scenarios is true. The back and forth stalls, then shifts into a new line of questioning whether she understands what has happened to her children. Are you concerned about how your sons are doing? Yes. Can't stop thinking about it. Are they okay? They're both okay. I just can't stop thinking about it. I don't even know what I'm so scared of. What are you scared of? Losing my children. I'm sorry, say it again. Losing what? My children. Even now, sitting in an interrogation room having shot her children multiple times, Tiffany says she's scared of losing them. The irony is almost unbearable. She's scared of losing the children she just tried to kill. But in the twisted logic of her mental state, maybe this makes sense. Maybe in her mind, she shot them to protect them from something worse, from being lost to the manipulation of Parker Borders or the video games or whatever evil forces she believed were threatening them. And now she's scared that despite her protective violence, they'll still be lost, either because they'll die from their injuries or because they'll be taken away from her by the authorities. Either way, the outcome she was trying to prevent by shooting them is now inevitable. She will lose her children. She has already lost them. Oh, okay. I know you say you're a good mom and I believe you, and you say you love them and I believe you there too. I really, really do. But if you love them so much, what made you shoot them, you know? That's hard for me to understand. I wish I could hear you answer why. Do you think Parker manipulated you to the point that he had you shoot your kids? The detective is being remarkably patient here, validating Tiffany's self-image as a good mother who loves her children while still pressing her to explain the inexplicable. If you love them so much, why did you shoot them? It's the fundamental question at the heart of this case, and it's one that Tiffany seems unable or unwilling to answer directly. I know ultimately the mom that I am and the person that I am. I know God wouldn't do that to me, but I know people will do that. The system, and I just know what I know. That's all. God wouldn't do that to me, but people will. This is an important statement because it shows where Tiffany locates the source of evil. Not in God, not in the divine, not in anything supernatural or spiritual, but in people, in the system, in the human and technological world that surrounds her. God is on her side. God knows she's a good person. But people, the system, they're capable of manipulating her, of forcing her to do things against her nature. This belief allows her to maintain her identity as a godly woman, a good mother, while acknowledging that she did something terrible. It wasn't her. It was people working through the system, through technology, through manipulation. It's clear that Tiffany Lucas is not well, and she's cognizant of that herself. She asked to be evaluated. I need a psych evaluation immediately. Have you ever spoken to a psychiatrist before? Yes. Yes. You think they could? I need a mental evaluation right now. Do you think they would be able to help? No. I have nothing else to say until I get a mental evaluation. So Tiffany has spoken to a psychiatrist before. This means she has a history of mental health treatment, or at least mental health concerns. Whether she was diagnosed with anything, whether she was on medication that she stopped taking or that wasn't working, whether she was in ongoing treatment that failed to prevent this tragedy, these are all questions that would need to be answered as the case developed. But the fact that she's requesting a psychiatric evaluation shows that she understands on some level that her mental state is relevant to what happened. She knows something is wrong with her thinking, even if she can't articulate exactly what it is or how it led to the shooting. Do you think they would help you figure it out? Yes. Why did you shoot them? I did it. Who did it then? I told you. No, you didn't. Who shot them? If you didn't, who shot them? If you didn't, who did it? Tell me who did it. Hey, tell me who did it. Can you just send me to the mental, please? Can you just take me to the mental? We'll help you out there. But if you didn't do it, who did it? I don't have anything else to say. The detective pushes one more time. If you didn't do it, who did? It's a simple, direct question that requires a simple, direct answer. Parker Borders, someone else. But Tiffany has shut down completely. She has nothing else to say until she gets her mental evaluation. She's done talking. and rather than sit in silence or continue to deflect, she does something that effectively ends the interrogation. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. She begins to pray, reciting the Lord's Prayer, the most fundamental prayer in Christianity. This serves multiple functions. It walls her off from the detectives, creating a private space where she can retreat and not have to answer any more questions. It reasserts her identity as a woman of God, someone who prays, someone who is connected to the divine. And it shifts the emotional tone of the room from confrontation to something more like meditation or desperation, or plea for help from a higher power. The detectives can't really interrupt someone who's praying without seeming cruel or disrespectful, so they're forced to wait. Her words dissolve into prayer, a way to wall herself off from the detectives across the table. For several minutes, the room sits in silence, broken only by her murmured recitations. Then almost abruptly, she pivots back, her focus no longer on God but on her boys. Where are my children? I can't hear you. Where are my children? I can't hear you. Where are my children at? Okay, they are at the hospital. What? What is there? What's there? What state are they in? Both of them are still alive. They're in critical condition. This is the last meaningful exchange of the interview. Tiffany asks where her children are, and the detective tells her they're at the hospital in critical condition. The reality of what she's done seems to be starting to penetrate whatever fog of delusion or denial she's been operating under. Her children are in critical condition. They might die. They might already be dying while she sits in this interrogation room, and she is the reason why. It's the last meaningful exchange of the interview. The detectives have heard all they need. Her denials, her stories of manipulation, her prayers, and now her plea to know what became of her boys. The session ends not with a confession or clarity but with two children fighting for their lives and a mother unable or unwilling to explain why she pulled the trigger. When the questioning ends, detectives escort Tiffany Lucas from the interview room and into the jail's chain of custody. Later that same day, both of her sons succumb to their injuries and die at the hospital. 6-year-old Jayden and 9-year-old Maurice Lucas, two little boys who should have been in school that Wednesday, who should have been playing video games or watching cartoons or doing homework or any of the ordinary things that children do, were instead lying in a hospital trauma unit with bullet wounds to their heads. The doctors and nurses did everything they could. They performed emergency surgeries. They administered medications. They monitored brain activity. But the damage was simply too severe. The bullets had destroyed too much tissue. The blood loss had been too significant. And one by one, first one boy and then the other, their hearts stopped beating for the last time. They were pronounced dead within hours of each other, on the same day that their mother shot them, bringing a swift and final end to their short lives. The news of their deaths was communicated to Tiffany Lucas while she was in custody. Her reaction is not part of the public record. We don't know if she cried, if she shut down completely, if she continued to insist it wasn't her fault, if she finally showed some genuine remorse or emotion. What we do know is that from that point forward, she would be charged not with attempted murder, not with assault with a deadly weapon, but with 2 counts of murder. Capital murder. The killing of 2 children by their own mother. Lucas is booked into the Bullitt County Detention Center, charged with 2 counts of murder. Her bond is set at $2 million. From that moment on, she would never walk free again. $2 million is an extraordinarily high bond, but not surprising given the nature of the charges. Flight risk is less of a concern than danger to the community, though with $2 million, she's effectively being held without bond since it's unlikely she or her family could raise that amount. She would remain in jail throughout the entire legal process, from her initial booking through her eventual sentencing, a period of nearly a year during which she would have plenty of time to think about what she'd done and to work with her attorneys on how to defend herself against charges that seemed, on the surface, absolutely indefensible. In custody, she waits for nearly a year as the legal process churns forward. Motions are filed, hearings are held, and her attorneys signal they are preparing to argue insanity. But Lucas stays behind bars the entire time, her case inching toward trial. The insanity defense is the obvious strategy here. If Tiffany Lucas can be shown to have been so mentally ill at the time of the shooting that she didn't understand the nature of her actions or couldn't distinguish right from wrong, then she could be found not guilty by reason of insanity. This wouldn't mean she goes free. It would mean she'd be committed to a psychiatric facility, potentially for the rest of her life, rather than sent to prison. But it would mean that the legal system acknowledges she wasn't fully responsible for her actions, that her mental illness was the real culprit, not her character or her choices. The problem with the insanity defense is that it's very difficult to prove. The legal standard is incredibly high. It's not enough to show that someone has a mental illness. Most people with mental illnesses, even severe ones like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, never commit violent crimes and are held legally responsible for their actions when they do. You have to show that the mental illness was so severe and so active at the time of the crime that the person literally couldn't understand what they were doing or couldn't control their behavior. And there's evidence both for and against that interpretation in Tiffany Lucas's case. Evidence for insanity: her bizarre statements about video game manipulation and mind control, her fixation on Parker Borders and her belief that he was controlling her through technology, her apparent dissociation during and after the shooting, her inability or refusal to acknowledge what she'd done, her history of prior psychiatric treatment, the reports from friends and family that she'd been deteriorating mentally in the months before the shooting. Evidence against insanity: she knew the children were injured and went to get help, showing some awareness of reality. She could answer basic questions about her identity and circumstances. She understood she was in an interrogation room talking to police. She asked for a lawyer or a psychiatric evaluation, showing she understood her legal situation. She knew where the gun was and how to use it. She made deliberate choices to pull the trigger multiple times. She left the scene and went to the neighbors, showing purposeful behavior. A jury would have to weigh all of this evidence and decide whether Tiffany Lucas was insane at the time of the shooting, or whether she was a mother who killed her children for reasons we might never fully understand, but who understood enough about what she was doing to be held criminally responsible. Her attorneys would present psychiatric experts who would testify about her mental state. The prosecution would present their own experts who would likely argue that while she may have mental health issues, she still understood the nature of her actions and knew they were wrong. But we'll never know how that trial would have played out, because Tiffany Lucas decided not to take that chance. Almost a year after her arrest, Tiffany Lucas abandons the insanity defense her lawyers had floated and instead walks into a Bullitt County courtroom to plead guilty. It's an open plea, no deal, no leniency. This puts her future entirely in the hands of the judge. An open plea means that Tiffany and her attorneys are not negotiating with the prosecution for a reduced sentence. She's not pleading guilty in exchange for anything. She's simply admitting to the crime and asking the judge to decide her punishment. This is a risky strategy because judges have discretion within the sentencing guidelines, and without a plea agreement, there's no guarantee of what sentence she'll receive. She could get the minimum, life with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Or she could get the maximum, life without parole, meaning she would die in prison. Why would she take this risk? Why would she give up on the insanity defense and plead guilty? Several possible reasons. Her attorneys may have advised her that the insanity defense was unlikely to succeed, that the evidence of her awareness and purposeful behavior was too strong. She may have wanted to spare her family the trauma of a trial, where all the details of what she did to those children would be presented in graphic detail. She may have genuinely felt guilty and wanted to take responsibility, even if she still believed she had been manipulated. Or she may have calculated that an open plea and genuine remorse might result in a more lenient sentence than being convicted by a jury and sentenced by a judge who's just heard all the evidence against her. Whatever her reasons, the decision was made. Tiffany Lucas would plead guilty to 2 counts of murder and face whatever punishment the judge deemed appropriate. That future was decided in November 2024 when the courthouse filled with family, neighbors, reporters, and much of Shepherdsville, Kentucky. Relatives of Jayden and Maurice spoke about birthdays never celebrated, milestones cut short, and the grief that now defined their families. Among those who took the stand was Jayden's grandmother. For her, this loss was almost unbearable. The sentencing hearing is often the only opportunity that victims' families have to address the court directly, to make what's called a victim impact statement. These statements are not evidence in the legal sense. They don't prove guilt or innocence, but they do give the judge a fuller picture of the harm that was caused, not just to the direct victims who are no longer alive to speak for themselves, but to all the people who loved them and whose lives have been forever changed by their deaths. In this case, the grandmothers, the grandfathers, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, the neighbors, the teachers, everyone who knew Jayden and Maurice, and would now live the rest of their lives with a hole in their family where those boys should have been. You know we love Jayden and Maurice. You have ripped our lives apart and you know that. You could have given them kids to us and we would have taken care of them, but you have been selfish. My heart is in pieces every second of the day. It hurts, and I hope they give you 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. I want you to suffer just like I'm suffering right now. They did not deserve that, and we all love them so much. This statement from Jayden's grandmother captures the rage and grief that Tiffany Lucas's crime has created. We loved those boys. You ripped our lives apart. You could have given them to us. This last point is particularly poignant because it's true. If Tiffany Lucas was struggling with mental illness, if she felt unable to care for her children, if she believed they were in danger from manipulation or outside forces, she had options. She could have called Child Protective Services herself. She could have asked family members to take the boys. She could have gone to a hospital and admitted herself for psychiatric treatment. She could have done any number of things that would have protected her children rather than killing them. But she didn't. She chose violence instead, and that choice, whether it was driven by mental illness or not, has destroyed not just Jayden and Maurice's lives, but the lives of everyone who loved them. The grandmother's wish is clear: 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Make her suffer the way we're suffering. Let her spend the rest of her life behind bars knowing what she's done and never having a chance to be free. It's a completely understandable sentiment from someone whose family has been shattered by an act of unspeakable cruelty. Whether the judge would agree with that sentiment, whether he would see Tiffany Lucas as deserving of the absolute maximum penalty, or whether he would factor in her mental health issues and show some degree of mercy, that was the question the entire courtroom was waiting to hear answered. When Judge Rodney Burress delivered his ruling, he handed down the maximum sentence. Case number 23 CR 404, Commonwealth of Kentucky versus Tiffany Lucas. On count 1, the court will adjudge the defendant guilty of the offense of murder and fix her sentence at life in prison. On count 2, the court will adjudge the defendant guilty of the offense of murder and fix her sentence at life in prison. The court will order that the sheriff's department deliver the defendant to the custody of the corrections cabinet for service of her sentence of imprisonment. 2 life sentences, the maximum penalty allowed under Kentucky law for 2 counts of murder. Judge Burress could have sentenced her to less. He could have recommended parole eligibility after a certain number of years. He could have taken into account her mental health issues, her lack of prior criminal record, her apparent delusions about manipulation and control. But he didn't. He gave her life for each child she killed, sending a clear message that regardless of her mental state, regardless of her explanations and excuses, she was responsible for the deaths of Jayden and Maurice Lucas, and would pay for those deaths with her freedom for the rest of her life. The courtroom erupted in applause. Family members and supporters of the victims clapped and cheered as the sentence was read. This is unusual in a courtroom, where decorum is usually strictly enforced, but the judge allowed it. He understood that these people needed some sense of closure, some feeling that justice had been done, even though no sentence could ever bring back two murdered children. The applause was not celebration in any normal sense. It was relief. Relief that Tiffany Lucas would never hurt anyone else. Relief that she would spend her life in prison. Relief that the legal system had recognized the severity of what she'd done and punished her accordingly. But not everyone felt that justice had been served. She should have gotten more. Life is 20 years, so in 20 years she'll go up for parole. In 20 years she'll be about 52. You can still have kids at 52. Once again, I feel like they didn't get the justice they deserved. This statement from another family member points to a technical reality of the Kentucky criminal justice system. A life sentence in Kentucky means eligibility for parole after serving 20 years. It doesn't mean automatic release. It means that after 20 years, Tiffany Lucas would have the right to appear before a parole board and make the case that she's been rehabilitated, that she's no longer a danger, that she deserves a chance at freedom. The parole board would then decide whether to grant or deny that request. Given the nature of her crime, given that she killed two children, her own children, it seems unlikely that any parole board would ever release her. But the possibility exists, and for a family member who wants absolute certainty that Tiffany Lucas will never be free, that possibility is unacceptable. The comment about her being 52 and still being able to have children is particularly chilling. It suggests a fear that if Tiffany Lucas is ever released, she could have more children and potentially harm them. It suggests a belief that she is fundamentally dangerous, fundamentally unfit to be a mother, and that no amount of time or treatment or rehabilitation could ever change that. Whether this belief is fair or justified, whether Tiffany Lucas could potentially recover from her mental illness and become a different person over the course of 20 years in prison, is impossible to say. But the fear is understandable. Once you've killed your own children, how can anyone ever trust you with children again? Even with a conviction and 2 life sentences, the scars remain. The echo of that November morning and the lives it took still ripple through the community of Shepherdsville. 2 young boys, Jayden and Maurice, will never grow up. They'll never celebrate another birthday, never graduate, never experience the lives they deserved. And the question that haunts everyone who followed this case remains: could this tragedy have been prevented? This is the question that always lingers after cases like this. Could it have been prevented? The warning signs were there. Tiffany's behavior had been deteriorating for months. Friends and family noticed changes. Child Protective Services had been called to the home before. She had a history of psychiatric treatment. She was expressing bizarre delusional beliefs about technology and manipulation. All of these are red flags that something serious was happening, that intervention was needed. But intervention in mental health cases is complicated, difficult, and often inadequate. You can't force someone into treatment unless they're in immediate danger to themselves or others, and proving that threshold before violence occurs is incredibly difficult. Even if you can get someone into treatment, you can't force them to take their medication once they're released. Even if they do take their medication, it doesn't always work perfectly, and side effects can be so unpleasant that people stop taking it. Even if they stay in treatment and take their medication, they might still have breakthrough symptoms, especially during times of stress. And then there's the question of resources. Mental health services in many parts of the country, including rural Kentucky, are chronically underfunded and understaffed. There aren't enough psychiatric beds, enough therapists, enough case managers to provide the kind of intensive, ongoing support that people with severe mental illness often need. Child Protective Services is similarly overwhelmed, with caseworkers handling far more cases than they can adequately monitor. So even when someone calls in a concern about a child's welfare, even when a case is opened and investigated, there might not be enough evidence to remove the children, or there might not be enough foster care placements available, or the case might get closed due to resource constraints before the real danger becomes apparent. All of which is to say that while it's easy to look back after a tragedy and say this could have been prevented, the reality is far more complex. The systems we rely on to protect children and treat mental illness are imperfect, underfunded, and often overwhelmed. Individual caseworkers and therapists and family members do the best they can with the resources and information available to them. But sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes people fall through the cracks. Sometimes the worst happens despite everyone's best efforts. And sometimes, as in this case, two children pay the price for those failures. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try to do better. Every case like this should prompt a review of what went wrong and what could be improved. Did CPS follow up adequately on the reports they received? Was Tiffany Lucas's psychiatric treatment appropriate and sufficient? Were there opportunities to intervene that were missed? Could family members have done more to get her help or to protect the children? These are painful questions, but they're important ones. Because while we can't bring back Jayden and Maurice Lucas, we might be able to prevent the next tragedy if we learn from this one and make the necessary changes to our mental health and child protection systems. But for now, for the people of Shepherdsville, for the family members who testified at the sentencing hearing, for the neighbors who found two dying children in their bedroom, for the first responders who tried to save them, for the detectives who had to investigate this horrific crime, for everyone touched by this tragedy, there is only grief and anger and the painful process of trying to make sense of something that will never make sense. Tiffany Lucas is now serving her sentence at a Kentucky State Correctional Facility for women. She will be eligible for parole in 20 years, in 2044, when she'll be 52 years old. Whether she'll actually be granted parole at that time is another question entirely. She'll have to demonstrate to a parole board that she's been rehabilitated, that she's participated in treatment programs, that she understands what she did and takes full responsibility for it, and that she poses no danger to society. Given that she killed two children, her own children, the bar for demonstrating rehabilitation will be extraordinarily high. What we know about her time in prison is limited. Inmates have some privacy rights, and details about their daily lives, their mental health treatment, their behavior in custody, are generally not made public unless there's a specific reason to disclose them. We don't know if Tiffany has continued to maintain that she was manipulated by Parker boarders and video games, or if she's come to accept responsibility for what she did. We don't know if she's been diagnosed with a specific mental illness and is receiving treatment for it. We don't know if she's expressed remorse or if she continues to insist she was a good mother who was forced into violence by external forces. All of that remains behind prison walls, private information between Tiffany Lucas, her mental health providers, and the corrections officials who oversee her custody. What we do know is that two children are dead, 6-year-old Jayden Lucas and 9-year-old Maurice Lucas, two boys who should be teenagers now, in school, playing sports, hanging out with friends, figuring out who they want to be when they grow up. Instead, they're buried in a cemetery somewhere in Kentucky, their lives cut short at ages that most of us can barely remember from our own childhoods. They never got to grow up. They never got to have first crushes or learn to drive or go to prom or any of the other milestones that mark the passage from childhood to adulthood. They were murdered in their beds by the person who was supposed to protect them above all others, their mother. The psychological impact on the community has been significant. Shepherdsville is a small town where violent crime is rare and murder even rarer. The idea that a mother could kill her own children is so fundamentally disturbing, so contrary to everything we believe about maternal instinct and the bonds of family, that it shakes people's sense of safety and order. If a mother can kill her children, If that kind of violence can happen in a quiet neighborhood on an ordinary Wednesday morning, then what else is possible? What other horrors might be lurking behind closed doors in houses that look perfectly normal from the outside? This is the ripple effect of a crime like this. It's not just the direct victims and their immediate family who are affected. It's the entire community that has to grapple with the knowledge that this happened here, in their town, in their neighborhood. It's the children who were Jayden and Maurice's classmates and who now have to process the fact that their friends are dead and their friend's mother killed them. It's the teachers who taught those boys and who will always wonder if there was something they could have seen or done. It's the neighbors who heard the gunshots and didn't realize what they were hearing until it was too late. Everyone carries a piece of this tragedy with them, and it becomes part of the story of Shepherdsville, a dark chapter that can never be erased. In the years since the shooting, there have been calls for better mental health resources in Bullitt County and across Kentucky. Advocates have pointed to this case as an example of what can happen when mental illness goes untreated or inadequately treated. They've called for more funding for psychiatric services, for better training for CPS workers in recognizing mental health crises, for improved coordination between mental health providers and child welfare agencies. Whether those calls will result in meaningful change remains to be seen. Policy changes are slow, funding is always limited, and there are many competing priorities for limited public resources. But the case of Tiffany Lucas stands as a stark reminder of what's at stake. When we fail to adequately address mental illness, when we don't provide sufficient resources for treatment and intervention, when we don't have systems in place to identify and help people in crisis before they hurt themselves or others, children die. Families are destroyed. Communities are traumatized. And we're left asking the same painful question that always follows these tragedies. Could this have been prevented? The answer, uncomfortable as it is probably yes. Not with certainty, not with any guaranteed intervention that would have absolutely stopped Tiffany Lucas from harming her children, but with better resources, better coordination, better follow-through on the warning signs that were there, this tragedy might have been avoided. Jayden and Maurice might still be alive. They might be in school right now, safe, growing, thriving. Instead, they're dead, killed by their mother in a moment of what she claimed was manipulation. But what the evidence suggests was psychotic break or delusional crisis that had been building for a long time. And Tiffany Lucas sits in prison, serving 2 life sentences for murder, her future limited to the walls of a cell and the slim possibility of parole 2 decades from now. Whether she's a monster who deserves to spend the rest of her life behind bars, or a severely mentally ill woman who needed help that she never received, and who committed an unspeakable act while in the grip of delusion she couldn't control, or something in between those extremes, is a question that people will continue to debate. But what's not debatable is that she pulled the trigger. She fired the gun that killed her sons. And regardless of what was happening in her mind at the time, regardless of whether she believed she was being manipulated or was trying to protect them, or was completely detached from reality, she is the person who ended their lives. The families of Jayden and Maurice Lucas will never get their boys back. They'll never hear their voices again, never see them smile, never watch them grow into the young men they should have become. Every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering will be marked by their absence. Every milestone that other children reach, learning to ride a bike or graduating from elementary school or getting their driver's license, will be a reminder of what Jayden and Maurice will never experience. The grief doesn't end. It doesn't fade into something manageable. It becomes a permanent part of who you are, a weight you carry every single day for the rest of your life. And for what? What was gained by their deaths? In Tiffany Lucas's delusional thinking, she may have believed she was protecting them from manipulation, saving them from being controlled by video games or Parker boarders or the internet. But all she did was end their lives. She didn't save them. She killed them. Whatever threat she imagined they were facing, it wasn't worse than death. Nothing could be worse than death, especially not for two young children who had their whole lives ahead of them. This case also raises important questions about how we as a society think about mental illness and criminal responsibility. The insanity defense exists because we recognize that people who are genuinely unable to understand their actions or control their behavior due to severe mental illness shouldn't be punished in the same way as people who commit crimes with full awareness and intent. But the legal standard for insanity is very high, deliberately so, because we don't want people to be able to escape responsibility for their crimes by claiming they were crazy. The challenge is distinguishing between someone who commits a crime because of mental illness and someone who commits a crime and happens to have a mental illness, but was still capable of making choices and understanding consequences. Tiffany Lucas may have been genuinely delusional. She may have truly believed that video games and Parker boarders were manipulating her and her children. She may have experienced her actions as something being done to her rather than by her, as if she were a puppet being controlled by outside forces. If that's the case, if she was truly in the grip of psychosis when she shot her sons, then from a moral and medical perspective, she's as much a victim of her illness as her children were victims of her violence. But from a legal perspective, if she understood enough to load a gun, aim it at her children, pull the trigger multiple times, and then seek help afterward, she understood enough to be held criminally responsible. The fact that she pleaded guilty rather than pursuing the insanity defense suggests that either she or her attorneys believed that defense wouldn't succeed, that a jury would find her legally sane despite her bizarre beliefs and statements. It suggests that despite the mental illness that may have contributed to her actions, she was aware enough, competent enough, responsible enough to be punished under the law. And so she is. 2 life sentences. The rest of her life in prison, or at least the next 20 years, with the possibility of many more after that. In the end, this case is a tragedy on every level. 2 children are dead who should be alive. A mother who may have been severely mentally ill killed her own sons and will spend the rest of her life paying for it. A family has been torn apart by grief and loss. A community has been traumatized by an act of violence that shattered their sense of safety. Systems that are supposed to protect children and treat mental illness failed to prevent this outcome. And we're all left with the uncomfortable knowledge that somewhere right now, there's probably another mother struggling with untreated mental illness, another family showing warning signs that something is seriously wrong, another tragedy waiting to happen unless we do better at identifying people in crisis and getting them the help they need before it's too late. The story of Tiffany Lucas and her sons Jayden and Maurice is not just about one terrible morning in November 2023. It's about all the moments that led up to that morning, all the missed opportunities for intervention, all the failures of systems and individuals to recognize and respond to a mental health crisis that was escalating toward violence. It's about the limitations of our mental health care system, the challenges of protecting children while respecting parental rights, the difficulty of predicting and preventing violence even when warning signs are present. And it's about the devastating consequences when all of those factors converge in the worst possible way. For the people who loved Jayden and Maurice, for the grandmother who stood in court and demanded justice, for the neighbors who tried to save them, for everyone whose life was touched by this tragedy, the questions will linger. Why did this happen? How could a mother do this to her children? Could it have been stopped? And the answers, such as they are, will never be fully satisfying, because no explanation can make sense of the senseless. No understanding of mental illness or criminal psychology can restore 2 murdered children to life. No sentence, no matter how severe, can give their family what they really want, which is to have Jayden and Maurice back, safe and alive, and growing up the way they should have been. All we can do is remember them. Remember that they were real children with real lives and real potential, not just statistics or victims in a true crime story. Remember that they were loved by their family, that people cared about them and missed them, and will carry the grief of their loss for the rest of their lives. Remember that what happened to them was a tragedy that might have been prevented if our systems worked better, if mental illness was treated more effectively, if help was available when it was needed most. And remember that there are other children out there right now who might be at risk, other families in crisis, other tragedies waiting to happen unless we commit to doing better. This has been the story of the Shepherdsville tragedy, the case of Tiffany Lucas and the murder of her two young sons, Jayden and Maurice. It's a story without a happy ending, without any real resolution, without anything that makes the horror of what happened more bearable. It's just a story of loss and grief and unanswered questions, a reminder of how fragile life is and how quickly it can be destroyed by violence, illness, and the failure of the systems we rely on to protect the most vulnerable among us. If this case has moved you, if you believe in keeping the memories of Jayden and Maurice Lucas alive and demanding better from our mental health and child protection systems, then I'm asking you to do something right now. Subscribe to Cold Case Crimes and hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who cares about justice and victims' rights. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts, your reflections, or even just a message of remembrance for these two innocent boys whose lives were stolen from them. The work of seeking justice and preventing future tragedies doesn't end when the court case is over. It continues as long as we keep these stories alive, as long as we refuse to forget, as long as we demand that society do better at protecting children and treating mental illness. Jayden Lucas was 6 years old. Maurice Lucas was 9 years old. They deserve to grow up. They deserve to live. And the fact that they didn't, the fact that their own mother took that chance away from them, is something we should never stop being angry about and never stop working to prevent from happening to other children. Rest in peace, Jayden and Maurice. You are not forgotten. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay informed, and never forget that behind every case, behind every statistic, behind every news headline, there are real people whose lives matter and whose stories deserve to be told. This is Cold Case Crimes, and I'll see you in the next investigation.